Welcome back to the IndeVets Happy Hour. I am your host, Andrew Heller, Dr. Andrew Heller, DBM. I'm here with my co-host, as usual,
Dr. Marisa Brunetti.
We actually have an amazing new studio tonight.
Yeah.
We're actually in your basement.
It's a true happy hour.
It's a true happy hour. We're sitting actually at a bar.
Yeah, it's a finished basement, guys. It's not like some creepy, dirty basement.
And we are drinking beer. I'm on keto, though, so I can't drink as much as I normally do.
I told Andrew not to tell people he was on keto, but apparently he can't stop telling people he's on keto.
I was just telling Ross, I can't not talk about it because I'm in so much pain from it all the time that it's like constantly on
Well,
my
now
mind.
you know what a DKA feels like in the early stages.
But I think I've gotten to the point now where I'm allowed 50 carbs per day, so like a flute glass of beer actually is probably about 5 or 10 right there.
I don't know. He's literally drinking beer out of a champagne flute. So
it tastes better this way.
You're so fancy.
I don't know. It's very
You're fancy.
Anyway, we are back. We are continuing our Pearls series. We've got a great refresher for you today. We're going to be talking about hypothyroidism, obviously in dogs. And we've got a couple of announcements. We do have a new sponsor, and we have an amazing guest today. So I'm going to let Marisa introduce both.
So we've talked about this brewing company before, but they are literally a mile from my house, Conshohocken Beer Company. And they were generous enough to donate 2 4-packs of their amazing beer, as well as a gift card that we will be raffling off to the doctors that Amy supervises for IndeVets, and they live in the greater Philly area. So Conchi Brewing actually has 5 locations. I don't know if you knew that, Andrew, but
I didn't.
So a bunch
I've been drinking their beer all these years.
Exactly. So King of Prussia and Havertown. So go online and check out Conchi Brewing, see where they are. If you go to the one in Conshohocken, it's right on the trail, on the Schuylkill River Trail. So you can literally run or ride your bike to the brewery and then get a beer and then run or ride your bike home.
Safe.
It's
to
so
ride
safe.
Bikes and drink beer.
Super safe. And then I just wanted to say they also do really cool local charity fundraisers, which I didn't know about. So if you have a local charity, you can actually talk to Conchi Brewing and they'll hold an event for you, and about 20% of all the people you bring and their receipts will go to the charity of your choice. It's a cool place. So I'm excited. I'm drinking their blueberry tart ale, which is delicious and makes me think of summer. You're drinking Puddler's Row, which is their lager. And we also have, in solidarity with Amy, who is not currently with us.
Well, you haven't introduced our guest yet.
That's okay. We have our guest who really likes porters, beer porters. And
not porter, the occupation.
Not the human. So I'm lifting a porter to you. I wish you were here.
Cheers.
In the same room, but cheers. Thank you again, Conchi Brewing Company. Amy, we will draw one of your doctors and we'll announce it next week after the podcast goes live. Anyway, all right, so I'm excited. You know how excited I am about season 2 because we're doing Pearls for general practitioners, and our amazing area medical director for the greater Philadelphia area is Dr. Amy Lloyd. And she is here with us today to talk about hypothyroidism because for some reason she likes this disease. Well,
it is the most common endocrine disease in dogs, isn't it?
That's true. And it's also the most annoying one, I think, because I think a lot of people say dogs have hypothyroidism and they don't actually. And I know Amy will get into that later. But Amy,
my dog is fat. It must have hypothyroidism.
Right, exactly. So Amy, will you just give us a brief history of your career in vet med?
Yeah, sure. So I graduated from Penn Vet in 1998, and I went to work at 2 general practices. And then I went and I owned my own mobile clinic for a total of 14 years, full service mobile, did surgery, ultrasound, a ton of stuff you can do at someone's house. It's amazing. And then I joined IndeVets in 2020 and became the area medical director in January of 2021.
I can't believe you've only been part of the team for 2 years. It feels like 10, which is great. That's a good thing.
Hopefully many more.
So one of the things we do, Amy, at the beginning of each podcast is we say, who is this podcast directed to, right? And the obvious answer is general practice, small animal veterinarians. But who else might benefit from some of this information?
So I would say general practice small animal veterinarians, but also technicians, and honestly, even dog owners could listen to this to know the difference between thinking their dog's hypothyroid just because they're chubby and they can't seem to get the weight off of them, and really understanding what the disease process is about.
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
Yeah, and a lot of people that are not veterinarians have told me they listen and they really enjoy a lot of these refreshers. So I think they get a lot out of it.
Yeah. So also, in the who for this is who gets this disease, right? We'll start off talking about hypothyroidism, but like what animal gets hypothyroidism?
Dogs primarily. People get it too. And I actually compare it to people's diseases a lot of times when I'm talking to people, because a lot of people know someone that has hypothyroidism. So in my client communication, I oftentimes will discuss that and explaining how the animals feel, and it helps the owners to buy into treatment. But for the most part, we're talking about dogs. Cats can get it because we overtreat with methimazole when they're hyperthyroid. Dogs can also get it secondary to treatment for thyroid carcinoma. They can have it congenitally, but that's much more rare. But typically, it's middle-aged dogs.
Awesome. All right. So briefly, I mean, it seems pretty obvious that knocking you here is my dog's tail against the wall. So
My dog's not really enjoying it.
Ross, can you call the dog?
This is going to be really good to edit.
He's going to have to edit out every little tap.
Yep.
Tap.
So, the name hypothyroidism tells you what it is, but can you briefly just tell us, you basically told us what dogs get hypothyroidism, but how does it typically present? Very briefly.
So hypothyroidism is related to a poorly functioning thyroid, and that can happen for several different reasons based on where the thyroid hormone comes from. But the most common reason is autoimmune thyroiditis, which is typically a lymphocytic thyroiditis. So the body is attacking its own thyroid gland, and it goes slowly over time. There's slow destruction. Once it reaches about 75%, there's an actual clinical reduction in thyroid hormone to the point where dogs get clinical signs. And those signs can occur in many different ways. Typically, you think of the lethargic dog that is always cold, is overweight, has a poor hair coat. Oftentimes, the tail is the first place to lose hair, and the tail will get hyperpigmented and alopecic, and they have this little rat tail. They can get facial myxedema with a typical tragic expression, and they're just generally lazy.
Yeah.
So those are the most common things we think of.
Now, if you're a pet owner out there, you own a dog, what breeds come to mind when you think of this disease?
Oh my gosh, there's so many breeds, it's ridiculous. But with my patient population, I've seen a preponderance of golden retrievers.
Yeah.
Beagles can get it, Gordon Setters can get it. There's so many breeds, Akitas. It's really hard. And then there's breeds that naturally have lower thyroid levels, like the sight hounds. So people are often overinterpreting T4s in sight hounds.
Yeah, that's a good point. I forgot about that, actually. Yeah.
I also saw Dobermans on there and boxers on the list.
Oh, boxers, because they do get some alopecic and hyperpigmentation, which could be a number of things. But Awesome. Okay, so one of my biggest soapboxes, I think, in veterinary medicine is the overdiagnosis or incorrect diagnosis of hypothyroidism in dogs. And so what is I'm sure endocrinologists will argue about this, but how should our doctors be diagnosing hypothyroidism in dogs? True primary hypothyroidism.
My preference would be the panel through Michigan State Animal Diagnostic Laboratory because it's the most complete. And if owners can afford to do a T4, a free T4, and a TSH through a reference lab, then they can afford to do a Michigan panel because it costs about the same. The TSH is not terribly accurate in dogs as it is in humans because in dogs, up to 40% of dogs that are truly hypothyroid will actually have a normal TSH. So if I'm not running the Michigan panel, I usually run a T4, free T4, because otherwise people get hung up on the fact that the TSH might be normal. Owners, especially owners who have a human medical background, are very worried that their dogs have a normal TSH. And they're like, that's the gold standard in people. And I'm like, well, it's not in dogs. And so that's why I love the endocrinologist interpretation for Michigan State, because it's the most complete if they can afford it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And what is, when you see a low T4, right? It's just the T4. And what are other thoughts when you see that and you don't have the rest of the thyroid panel?
So it depends on what other clinical signs you see. So if the dog has a high cholesterol value or hypertriglyceridemia in a fasting sample or an elevated creatine kinase, then those things could all be pointing towards the dog actually having hypothyroidism. If the dog doesn't have true symptoms related to hypothyroidism and doesn't have any of those things, then I would seriously be questioning whether that is important or not.
Yeah. And, we call that euthyroid sick, right? So I was taught, never to really try to test a truly sick dog for hypothyroidism because you're probably going to get false results.
Well, and the other thing we have to remember is that during the day, there's just changes throughout the day, even in dogs that aren't truly euthyroid sick. So some dogs that are perfectly healthy can come back with a T4 of 0.7 and it's absolutely meaningless. And they can be 100% healthy. It can be routine screening blood work, and it's just the time of day that you caught them.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, that's a good point. I saw that it could be up to 50% of samples.
Yeah. So it's very overinterpreted, and I actually don't like it being in the routine wellness panels, especially for younger pets, because I think that then owners see it and they go down a road where they're worried their dog is sick when their dog is actually 100% fine.
Yeah, that's a very good point. We've seen a lot more T4s just because they're in the panel. So, okay, so your T4, your total T4 is low, your free T4 is low, and your TSH is high if you have that whole panel. And you may have other things from Michigan. But would you say that with a high TSH and low free and total T4, we can diagnose hypothyroidism?
Yes.
So if they have signs or other blood work, other chemistry abnormalities that are consistent with hypothyroidism, then I would treat them based on a low T4 and free T4 regardless of TSH, although I love it when their TSH is high.
Excellent. Awesome. And so how would you start? So you have this diagnosis. How would you start treatment?
So I would start treatment with levothyroxine. You're just replacing the hormone. And this is what's so wonderful about this disease is owners are always worried about giving medications. And I always say to owners, this isn't a medication. You're replacing something that your dog's body is no longer making because your dog is sick. And this is not a medication. You're just replacing what their body isn't doing on its own. And so you start at 0.01 to 0.02 mg per kg of levothyroxine. I was taught the brand name is best. So, our typical, it used to be Suloxin, now it's Thyro Tabs, but there's a lot of people using generics and getting good results with the generics. And you start with doing that BID. A lot of these dogs can be decreased to Q24 hours and do just fine. Some of them need a slight increase in dose when they're decreased to Q24 hours, and some of them do not.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think most of the dogs I've treated were twice a day, but you're right. I'm now reading like most dogs can be managed on once a day. So that makes total sense. How about monitoring? You start the dog, it's looking great, it's feeling great. What do you recommend to the owners for monitoring?
I always monitor 4 weeks out. That's what I've always done. You check just a thyroid level. You only really need one T4, 4 to 6 hours post-pill. If you want to be really cautious, you could do a pre-pill T4 and then do a 4 to 6 hours post. I haven't found that most owners really want to do that, and I can get good results as long as the 4 to 6 hours post is truly 4 to 6 hours post. But I'm very cautious about that. I will not let people do a random thyroid level after 12 hours. I tell them it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point for technicians to listen to as well, because I know they often would come in and they would it's usually a tech visit when they come in just for a blood test to check the T4. And I don't think they realize that it has to be done between certain hours of the day. So hopefully they were listening to that.
And for pet owners too, right? For making the appointment.
Yeah.
If everyone realizes there's a time period.
Yeah. If you're giving the pill at 8 a.m. every morning, come in the afternoon.
Yeah. Well, come in 12 to 2. Coming out on my lunch period, guys.
And that's part of the client education at the very beginning. I usually tell people that when I first diagnose them, when I'm first putting them on the medicine, I say, make your appointment for 4 weeks, make it right now, make it 4 to 6 hours after you're planning on giving that pill. And it should always be done 4 to 6 hours post-pill.
That's smart. That's good communication skills. That's why we hired you.
We're going to get into that. So you start the dog 4 weeks later. What if it's still too low? What if the T4 is still too low?
If it's still too low, then you need to increase the dose. So your goal is to have the 4 to 6 hours post-pill be in the high end of the normal range or a little over the normal range, with the caveat being that if the dog is having clinical symptoms of being over-supplemented, then you need to revisit that. If the dog isn't able to sleep at night, if they're losing an inappropriate amount of weight or muscle mass, if they're agitated in any way, then you need to revisit. If they have PUPD, if they're polyphagic, then you need to revisit your dosing as well.
That's a great point. And obviously for the opposite is true too. You probably decrease about 25% if it's too high, or increase 25%-ish if it's too low.
Yes, typically.
Awesome. And I've always, when dogs are truly hypothyroid and you treat them, like the results are awesome, right? So like, when do you typically, or when have you typically seen clinical signs improve or resolve once you start treatment?
So dogs can improve in terms of their lethargy within really a week in some cases. And most of the time, what I tell people is by the time of that first visit at 4 weeks, they're going to be seeing some improvement. And some dogs, by the time they come in at that 4-week visit, depending on how long they were hypothyroid before they were diagnosed, some dogs at that 4-week visit, the owners are like, they're back to what they used to be. And it's amazing.
Yeah, I think I need some thyroid supplementation.
It's a great disease to treat because it's so satisfying, right? Like you're seeing this
I love
lazy
it.
fat dog with skin problems all of a sudden become a new, young, healthy dog. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, it's my favorite. And that's why I had said I wanted to be on this podcast, actually, because I love really weird chronic internal medicine, insane cases. But this is something where I can just be a miracle worker and I don't have to do all that really weird, long-term, going down the rabbit hole, looking things up kind of thing. I can say, yay, we can fix your dog and you're going to be so happy.
Yeah. And Amy is, the queen of client communication. And we talk about this often. And she's just extremely practical in the way she talks to owners. And so I was hoping you could give some pearls as to what you say to clients to basically get them on board for diagnosis and treatment and management, basically.
So clients are really scared when their animals are sick. And I think that's the most important thing to remember is they come to us afraid. And if I feel like there's any possibility their pet has hypothyroidism, I make sure that the first thing they know is that this is a great diagnosis. And so we have to look for it because it's something we can treat so easily and we can help them and it's so rewarding. And I just make it really positive because it is really positive. And I say, let's look for a good thing to treat. And then when we find it, it's even more wonderful because the owners really are just so happy to have their dog back.
Mm-hmm.
It's also pretty cheap.
Yeah.
It's cheap to treat. It's cheap to monitor, really, because once they're set on their dose, oftentimes you don't have to monitor them that frequently. I personally like twice a year, but there's a lot of hospitals that only have people do it once a year to refill their medications. And so then that keeps owners happy.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm still a twice a year checker as well. Because usually they're like middle-aged to senior dogs anyway. So I'm like, yeah, we'll just do all your blood.
Good idea to get their full blood panel, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So obviously with your amazing career that you've had, you've probably seen some like weird hypothyroid cases. So do you want to just end with something weird?
Yeah. So my favorite one was a really long time ago. It's actually towards the beginning of my career when I feel like people weren't as on top of things as they are now with their pets. And I saw a dog that someone presented that wasn't that old. I want to say the dog was about 8. And it was a big dog. I think it was a Rottweiler. I'm picturing the dog in a cage. And the dog was just non-ambulatory, had myxedema. The owners really thought they were going to put the dog to sleep. And I remember getting this dog as a recent graduate and saying, hey, your dog is doing all these things. And the dog had peripheral neuropathy and the dog had myxedema in his face. And I think the dog was sort of bordering on myxedema coma. The dog was extremely sedate.
Ugh.
And I said, you know what? I said, let's just look for this and let's see. And that dog was literally a miracle because the owner was going to put the dog to sleep. The dog was completely non-ambulatory when he came in. He was obese. He had almost no hair. He had skin infections.
Oh my God.
And the dog went on. And it took several months before he came back to completely normal, but he did come back to being a normal dog and lived the rest of his lifespan on levothyroxine.
Wow. I mean, that is like That's like don't kill old rolling dogs, right? Like vestibular syndrome. That's the same. It's like don't kill fat myxedema dogs that have hypothyroidism. So that's a great story.
Yeah, it was a good lesson for me. So I do love hypothyroidism because I can fix them.
Great. Well, see, this is what I love. This is a perfect refresher. I have so appreciated you sharing your time with us today. And
Thank you, Amy.
Next time in person with beers.
Actually, this is the second time you've been on the podcast.
Oh, that's true.
So
Yes,
if
it
anybody
is.
wants to hear what Amy said, when did we have her on the
Heartworm.
No, we had her on the off-label episode.
Oh, yeah,
Off-label drugs. If you guys want to go back, I think it was like 4th or 5th episode.
Yeah, that
like
was fun. That was fun.
Yeah.
Amy, what's your second favorite disease to treat? Because we'll have you back on for that.
Well, I love hyperthyroidism too, but you guys are already doing that one.
Yeah,
That one's next. That one's next.
Yeah, you guys will see that. But again, thank you so much. Really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. And thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Like I said, we're doing hyperthyroidism in cats next time, and we'll have another special guest here to talk about it. If you have friends who would be interested in this, please let them know about this podcast, and you can leave us a rating on any of the places you find podcasts.
A 5-star rating.
5-star rating.
Yeah, you can leave us a 5-star
Preferably
rating.
5.
And yes, so just some updates about the pod for 2022. Andrew and I, this is our only job now. So we are...
Yeah, exactly. That's all we do.
Our full-time job is podcast host. So we are hoping to release episodes weekly now for 2022.
Oof. All right.
Yeah, get on it.
And we might change the name of the podcast. So if you see it named something else, don't be alarmed.
Yeah, we're trying to get the word vet into the podcast somehow since, soon the whole world will know about us, but currently.
If you guys have any great ideas for names, please drop them into the comment section. Let us know what you think.
We will see you in a week.
All right.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.